Well, welcome to another episode of Confidence in Conflict, your destination for learning how to prevent and better manage conflict in both your professional and personal lives. Well, Gary Klugowitz and I just got back from a 9-day trip to London, England, to open up our new division for Vistelar. I've been to the UK several times, but this was clearly the best visit ever. We had a great time. We did a bunch of touristy stuff on the weekends, but most of the time we spent training the team at Dynamis, who's our new representative in the UK and the Middle East for Vistelar. And we also had in class a bunch of other individuals from several of Dynamis's current customers all over the UK. So Jared O'D, he's the founder of Dynamis, and his brother Steve, they were just great hosts. Went out to dinner every night, went to pubs. It was quite fun, and the training was great. So you'll hear more about this trip and some of the insights we gained in upcoming podcasts. So look forward to that. Jared will focus in the UK on really two markets, the education and healthcare area, but will be expanding his reach over time. And as you know, we deal with a whole bunch of different disciplines in the United States. For example, over the next couple of months, Vistelar here in the United States, we're going to be training all the bus operators at the New Orleans Regional Transit Authority. And that's run by this company called Transdev, which is a global transit company based in France, and they have operations in 20 countries and on 5 continents. So Transdev also has operations in the UK with over 1,400 employees, so they might become a future customer of Dynamis. We'll see where that goes. Anyway, we're real excited about our new division in the UK and all the future opportunities, and we'll be certainly talking more about that, turning this into a global podcast. Okay, so on to this week's interview. My guest is Jim Lezala. Jim was first introduced to our training about 14 years ago when he was working for a residential treatment facility with about 72 residents. He went through 2 weeks of our training and included both the verbal and the physical tactics. It ended up having a huge impact on his organization. As you'll hear on the podcast, relationships were improved, use of restraints went down, injuries were reduced. And during the interview, Jim tells just a great story of the value of one of our tactics that we call the Showtime mindset. So I think you'll enjoy it. Here we go. Well, good evening, Jim. How are you doing?
Good evening, Al. I'm not doing too bad.
Good. Thanks for being on the episode this evening.
Oh, my pleasure.
We were talking just before this, and I didn't realize that Gary Klugowitz is one of our founders. I've mentioned him before in the podcast, but you first met this guy 14 years ago. I had no idea.
Yeah, I've known him for quite a while. I first heard his name. He's kind of a local legend, I guess. Had known some police officers and worked with some law enforcement, and they'd mentioned his name and just the reverence they gave him. I was like, wow, who is this Klugowitz guy? And years passed and didn't think too much of it. And I was working at an adolescent treatment center. It's for teenage boys who had been court ordered there due to a variety of offenses or issues. And we took in Department of Corrections clients, and we contracted to transport Department of Correction juvenile, sometimes from a county detention center to our state juvenile prisons. So,
and then was it training that you saw at Gary, or just meet him in some kind of another kind of an event?
Well, so we had an opening for some of the training we had to go through was called POSC. So like the correctional, at the time that it was principles of subject control, it was like the correctional version of the police defense and arrest tactics.
Right. Yep.
So we had an opening for a POSC instructor, and talked to my supervisor and said, this is something I'd really like to do. I think I'd be good at it. And they said, well, get the information and, we'll look at it. So I researched everything and signed up, and I had no idea that he would be the instructor. So
I love it.
So I got to meet the man, the myth, the legend.
Exactly.
I could do a whole podcast on that week and the stories, things I went through, and but definitely a very intense, interesting individual.
Yep. Well, I think and I don't know if I've told this story yet. Yeah, back in the early '80s, and we know all these guys that were involved, but in the early '80s, Wisconsin was unique in that a bunch of law enforcement people got together and said, we need a standardized way to train people in the state. And we need every law enforcement, every officer, every patrol officer, every corrections officer, all to go through similar training. And Gary Klugowitz was one of the guys putting that together. Randy Revlin, who works with us, is part of that. Bob Willis was part of that group.
Mm-hmm.
There was a handful maybe of people. And Wisconsin's kind of the only state in the country, I think. I think I heard of one other state, but that has a common training program that everybody goes through. And the POSC that you mentioned means its principles of subject control was the facility-focused training.
Right.
And then DAT, which was defense and arrest tactics, was the born-in-the-street police officer training.
Right.
And so, wow. Yeah. So that would have been like what? Like in the 90s sometime. Like, what is that? Mid-90s.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I don't know if you know, although we started Vistelar in 2009, I met Gary in 2002. Okay. So, no, you would have been in more than the 2000 timeframe. I have a whole nother decade there.
Yeah. I first heard his name in the late 90s and then finally got to meet him in the early 2000s. And
there we go. So we probably met him about the same time. Yep. Yeah, we actually put together a program right after 9/11. I knew a martial arts school owner in town, and we put together a program to train flight attendants on how to deal with terrorists. Because the flight attendants were, I don't know if you remember that time, but they were scared to death to get back on an airplane, and they're just crying for training. And we put together a program. We ended up presenting down at United Airlines and Northwest Airlines, Midwest. And then, if you remember, all the airlines went bankrupt, and they had no money, and the idea of spending money on training just disappeared. So it never went anywhere. But it was fun to work with Gary. And I still remember sitting in front of a committee at United Airlines in their training room. They had a whole a fuselage of a plane in this training room where they could practice getting on and off the plane and whatever. And we had probably an hour presentation. And midway through the presentation, Gary stopped and put on his red man suit. Right? In front. And which you're familiar with. But probably a lot of the audience wouldn't know what a red man suit is, but we'll deal with that another time. Yeah. So anyway, well, that's great. I didn't know it's been that long. So you've known about Vistelar material like for a long time, and your experience has primarily been in residential treatment. Is that?
That was the bulk of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
When I had signed up for it, I saw that it, was a 2-week training, and the previous instructors that I talked to said, "Well, wow, why is it 2 weeks?" I said, well, "I don't know," and I get there and I find out that there's a whole another week-long portion to become, basically a verbal interventions instructor.
Yep.
And which again was, early Vistelar material, kind of the foundation.
Yep.
And I brought that back to the facility because they thought they're, sending me out. They sent me out a boy. I came back a man. And
there we go.
they thought I'm just coming back with the physical stuff. And I said, hey, we have to up the number of hours. This verbal stuff is great. This is gold. Let me tell you, we're going to reduce our seclusions, our restraints, the physical intervention. And, a lot of the guys who'd been there for a while, kind of, okay, yeah, sure. But once we went through it and I ran all the classes through, I said, I need to retrain everybody that we have here now. And went through and retrained the whole facility. We said they got to do a full class verbal, full class physical. It's all got to be, meshed together, and everybody loved it. And sure enough, restraints went down, and everybody just had a better approach with the clients. It helped relationships. It decreased injuries. It was in my opinion, I mean, it changed
Wow.
changed the whole agency. I mean, it shaped the future, to be honest.
Well, as you know, we hear that all the time, and it's interesting for me because my background is more in business, and I saw this stuff when I first met Gary, and I just said, this is just brilliant stuff. More people need to see it because it had primarily been the training had been primarily in corrections, residential treatment, and in police. And what we've done is now it's we're in healthcare and mental health and transit and still in public safety and residential treatment, but just it seems like conflict is not isolated to just a few professions. It kind of is out there. We just did, we just did some work with SC Johnson, a manufacturing facility that makes Raid and whatever, and they have security folks there, and they wanted them to go through our training. And it's, you walk in the door, one of the first questions I ask is, is anybody having any conflict here? And, the hands go, boom, yep. We got no shortage of conflict. So you mentioned you had a little story to tell that highlights kind of one of the things that Vistelar teaches. So
sure.
Why don't you take us through that?
Well, let me go back in the past to even when, after I'd gone through the POSC instructor and the, verbal interventions, then because I was doing that training, sent me to do some, what they call trauma-informed care training as well, and became a trauma-informed care instructor. And, trauma-informed care is, it's basically trying to help professionals recognize, trauma symptoms and, the role the trauma plays in people's lives and try to keep them, from being re-traumatized and helping them rebuild a sense of, control and empowerment in their lives. And so my supervisors would always ask, hey, is this POSC training, is all this training you're doing, is that trauma sensitive? Is that, trauma informed? And I'd always assure them that it was, because I fully believed it was and totally connected the two. And they said, well, if you could just, try to, really focus on that. And, so part of my story has to do with just how, the training relates to trauma-informed care as well. So the agency that I worked for, I was a supervisor there, and we had, 5-6 residential units. And we also had, 2 group homes. Now the group homes were about a quarter mile away from the residential units, and they'd been staff housing. And if you had clients who were getting older and, possibly going to end up on their own or trying to transition back into the community, they could work their way down there. It was at least less restrictive environment, and they could learn independent living skills, maybe get a job off grounds. So at our peak, we had like 72 clients or residents at the whole facility.
And Jim, what was I think you might have mentioned it, but what's the age range was what?
It was 12 to 17. I mean, you could occasionally get someone who get an extension to 19, 18 or 19, but I'd say 14 to 18. So,
okay. Yep.
So as a supervisor, you also had to take, you were assigned different shifts where you were in charge of the whole shift and, the staff and the operations. So I ended up with, I shouldn't say ended up with, someone volunteered for second shift on Sunday nights. Second shift on Sunday nights was the hardest, in my opinion, the hardest shift to work as a shift supervisor, because it was the only shift out of the 7 days that week, excluding third shift, that you didn't have a backup supervisor. I was the only one there. Every other shift you had at least 2 supervisors on. So if something happened, something went down, you had somebody else who could, help run the place. Yep. And, I liked Sunday nights because I got off at 3 on Thursday and I didn't have to come back till 3:00 on Sunday. So I kind of got an extended weekend. So, it paid off a little bit, but, you also had a lot of call-ins on the weekends and just really added to, Sunday nights being stressful and kind of a rough night.
Yep.
So I'm working, it's a Sunday night, 3 to 11, and it's one of those nights you just go nonstop. I was getting calls. There was a crisis on every unit, and you had to coordinate transportation for different things and medication. And I can't remember if there were restraints. I just know it was one of those nights where I hadn't eaten all night. I couldn't tell you if I used the bathroom at all that night.
Right.
It was just nonstop. And so it's about 10 to 11, 10 minutes till the end of my shift. I haven't touched my paperwork yet. I'm just beat. I'm frustrated, tired. I know I'm not getting home till well after midnight. And just sit down. I'm like, all right, I'm going to start my paperwork. And I get a call over the radio. Now, the last thing I want to do is go to another caller. Everybody should be sleeping, right? So,
right. Yep.
Get a call. Hey, shift supervisor, we need some assistance down at was one of the group homes. I thought, one of the group homes? Again, those should be the best behaved guys. And it just happened to be one of the ones that I manage as well. So I was like, hey, that's one of my guys, It was one of my staff that's working. And I thought, I was kind of triggered, They say, yeah, we need some assistance. We'll call the young man Daryl. I said, Daryl just walked out of the house, and he's out in the driveway. So, a little background on Daryl.
So you had actually managed that facility. So you knew Daryl before you had to respond here.
Yeah. So, I knew all the clients because just as a supervisor, you went to all the calls, any crisis, reviewed all the paperwork, for the whole facility, regardless of the unit. And
okay, got it.
So
you knew all 72 people at some level. Yeah, you got it. Okay.
So Daryl was kind of special because we also had a school on grounds. We'd bring in day students, kids who had been expelled from their own schools in the community, and we'd bring them in, and that's where he had first come in. I had like 12 or 13 years old, just as a day student. First saw him, he's kind of a little guy, and then, he committed some offenses in the community and got ordered to come by us. And he was on our mental health unit. He was on our intensive supervision unit for a bit for, more violent offenders. And we kind of watched him grow up. And he got discharged and screwed up again and went to corrections. And then he went from corrections to back to our facility because, we knew him and he knew us. The county knew us. And so now, about 4 years later, he's starting to transition out. He's 17 years old. He's bigger than I am. He's down in the group home that I managed. And, so I knew him. I knew he had a lot of issues, a lot of troubles in his life, a lot of trauma, and should have been a sign, but he wouldn't open up to us. But a few weeks prior to this incident, he'd come out around 10 o'clock and come out of his bedroom and just sit in the living room and just refuse to go to bed.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Wouldn't talk to anybody. He'd say, F you guys, I'm not going to bed. I'm not doing nothing you tell me. And you try to talk to him, try to process, and you would think somebody that you've known that long would open up, but just won't tell us what was wrong. He wasn't being a danger to anybody, so there wasn't too much you could do. But after a while, the staff were getting frustrated. They were getting irritated. He'd do it close to the end of their shift. So now here he is. He's the one that's causing trouble on my night from hell.
Right.
So I leave the control center and walk to my vehicle, and I hop in, and I'm driving down, and I know just what I'm going to say to him. I mean, he's going to get both barrels. How dare he? He knows better. On a night like tonight, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to play these games. I'm driving down, and it's about a quarter mile. I probably made that quarter mile in 10 seconds because I wanted to get out. I wanted to go home. And I had all these personal thoughts and feelings. I was probably even talking to myself in the car on the way down. You know what? You better get up, get in that house, get to bed. And all these personal thoughts. I come flying into the driveway.
And Jim, as we talk about it, some of the stuff is easy to do when you're when you've had a good night rest and you're all calm and relaxed and everything's wonderful and you've had a great day. But some of this stuff's really hard to do when you're having a bad day like you're describing.
Well, and that was it. I mean, I was at my breaking point, and he, to use the straw that broke the camel's back. This was it. But so I pulled into the driveway, and the headlights show on him. He's standing in front of the garage, kind of leaning up against the garage door. I put my car into park, take a deep breath, kind of put my shoulders back, look in the mirror, get out of the car, start walking towards him, stop about between 10 and 15 feet away, and just kind of have a concerned look at my face and just say, hey, what's going on, Daryl? How can I help you? Total opposite of everything I had
exactly
prepared to do.
Right.
And just, it was like, a switch went on, and it's like, well, here we go. Like it's showtime. I mean, literally I walked out of that car and stepped onto the stage and, walked up to him, and, like I said, kept my distance a little bit, and he didn't talk at first. And then he sat down on the ground, and I walked a little bit closer, and he started opening up, and he told me that his dad, who would have been in prison for a few years, and I could see the tears starting to go down his eye, or down his face. And he starts telling me that his dad was supposed to get out of prison this week, but he had found out that it wasn't going to happen. And, so he was upset that because he was apparently excited to see his dad all week, but to go even further, his dad had sexually assaulted him and his siblings. He was a repeat sex offender. And I mean, he's going to be in there for a while. I mean, I know his dad was hoping to get out, and, didn't happen. So when I drove down there, had no idea, that's what he had on his mind. And I'm sure that's what he had on his mind and why he'd been coming out for weeks prior. I mean, the emotions he must have had for weeks, just of anticipation and fear or anxiety. And, he had all these thoughts and emotions, to deal with. So, he talked to me and, ended up processing with me, and I ultimately, got him to get up and, go to bed, and we dealt with it and processed throughout the week. But had I come down and let my personal feelings get in the way, had I said everything, that I personally wanted to say, had he, been the brunt of, just my own frustration, all the feelings I had built up from the night. I mean, I would have been going home a heck of a lot later than I already was, because, I mean, I could have set him off, re-traumatized him, triggered him. And, all I wanted to really do was go inside and go to bed.
And you would have gotten home much later, Jim.
Yeah. I mean, it could have ended with an emergency room visit, on my part.
Exactly. Yeah, well, as we talk about in our training, is that, all that stuff that was going through your head on the drive down, we call that natural language, right? It's how would you normally respond? What do people normally do in these situations? I'm angry, bad day, he's sitting out in the parking lot, I better do something about it. You got all that going on. And it usually doesn't work. You gotta take that and leave it alone, and then get back to the training, which is what you obviously did. And showtime, as you know, is one of our key methods. Is before you ever go into a situation, you make sure your attitude's right and your facial expression's right. And this is, at the end of the day, this is a performance.
Right.
You're walking in and say you got a few minutes with this guy, and you need to perform well if you want the thing to go well and not escalate into a mess.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and from a trauma standpoint, I mean, we talk about, Vistelar, a supportive atmosphere, as opposed to a defensive atmosphere. Somebody who's gone through the trauma that he's gone through in his life. I mean, he had somebody who was a caregiver, an authority figure, his own father, somebody who was supposed to be there for him, just shatter his worldview. I mean, I'm sure that affected him on a biological and physiological level, even, in his brain. And
you, you probably got introduced. I bet when you first met with Gary, trauma-informed care is obviously, it was well known in residential treatment centers. I think it ended up getting into healthcare. It's now very broadly taught in schools, but in the law enforcement world, I think it's really, really new. I don't think, law enforcement even knew the term 10, 15 years ago.
Sure.
And now it's becoming a bigger and bigger deal. And as empathy is like a core part of our training and seeing the world through other people's eyes. And, at the end of the day, this trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive, trauma-responsive, it's just empathy big time.
Right.
It's empathy, seeing the world through the, but understanding what's going on in that person's background that more than likely, it could also be in your background, but understand where they're coming from and that they've probably had some life, what's the term that's used? It's adverse childhood experiences, right? Isn't that the term? ACE? Yeah. That they've had that, if you just understood where they're coming from, you're going to treat them a whole lot differently than if you just react to what you were feeling on the drive down that night.
Well, and that puts it perfectly, if I had known, what he was going through, but let's just face it. Life is traumatic. I'm sure that everybody has got trauma on some level. And if we would just treat everybody, we talk about treating everybody with dignity and showing them respect, but if you treated everybody as if they had trauma, which I'm sure they do, but you don't know what it is or what the level is. And everybody even people who have experienced the same incident, say a traumatic car accident. You have, two people, two brothers grew up in the same family. Both could be affected completely different, despite the similar backgrounds and same experience. One could be fine the next day, and then the next will deal with it for the next 20 years of his life. So we don't know how people are going to react to us. So it's in everybody's benefit, because if someone's been traumatized, if they're triggered, they can just be overcome with just these intolerable feelings that they, don't know how to deal with. And a lot of times they act out. And if you ever see anybody blow up over just something minor, you sit and think, well, what's wrong with that person? But what you should be thinking is what's happened to this person? What have they gone through that led to this, to a blow up over something so minor? And if we just thought of it, everybody like that, it'd make things a lot easier. We have a lot less conflict.
I was trying to read, you just captured it. I had forgotten that. It's not what's wrong with you. It's what happened to you.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's such a really powerful statement. Not what's wrong with you, which is, the normal way of thinking about somebody that's acting out, but what happened to you? What in your background is causing you to act this way? And how can I make sure that the way I'm treating you is not triggering those past feelings?
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of that's a whole other section of our training we could talk about, but that's where sometimes tactics like our persuasion sequence might not work because they're in such a heightened state that they're not even, physically capable of bringing themselves down from. That's when we kind of have to go to more of a crisis intervention mode. And, just because, rational thinking and, things like, explaining reasons why and giving them options, it doesn't matter because, they're not functioning on that level at that time. We have to kind of bring them back. So,
I think the Showtime thing, it's such a simple concept of just making sure you're ready, getting your facial expression right, stand up straight. It's showtime, stepping on the stage. This is a performance. Just making sure you're doing your job as well as you can do it in that situation. And it's a big deal. And
it took me 2-3 seconds, in the driver's seat of a car, and
Yep.
It helped my relationship with the young man. It was trauma informed. It was good for me. It was good for him. It was, the whole package in 3 seconds. Yeah, obviously there's more to it, but that was a key point.
Jim, I don't know if have you heard this story. Might have told it during one of the classes, but we Gary and I did some training down in the South for a very large corporation, and we were dealing with their senior executives and very high level people. People had literally thousands of people reporting to them. Among all their teams, guys running manufacturing plants, whatever. It's about 20 of them, and so we went through the whole program. Showtime was obviously part of what we taught. And we got to the end of the day, and there was a couple of guys that had to leave just before we were officially ending. And so they said goodbye, and we were going around the room doing the little takeaway exercise where we asked people what's the big takeaway from today. And these two guys on the way out, they're going, big takeaway for us is showtime. And they're saying we're on our way to meet with our boss. And so we're gonna be doing showtime all the way over because we know we're in trouble because something had gone wrong that day.
Sure.
And they're going, we got to get our showtime mindset all figured out here before we show up in that guy's office.
That's funny. I was just talking to my sister. She had to meet with her boss last week, and I didn't say this is a showtime tactic. I was just like, hey, put your shoulders back. It'll help your stress. Take some deep breaths. Tell yourself you got this, and you can use it everywhere.
I love it. Yeah. So cool. Well, Jim, this has been great. We should do this again because I'd love to dig deeper into this. I'm assuming after how many years were you in residential treatment? I mean, it's
16.
It's a bunch of years.
16 years, and then went to child welfare, and that's where I still am now. So after hearing Dan Garrett's talk about it, it was kind of like, yeah, I know that.
So just tell me quickly, it's more of a personal curiosity. So I know that state of Wisconsin, that some of the child welfare folks are county employed, or I think, and then some are through agencies, right? Yes. So, and is that, you're not direct with the county, you're through an agency? Is that how you're doing this?
Yeah, that's a Milwaukee County only issue as far as, there's a longstanding lawsuit. Still hasn't been settled yet, and there's certain conditions the county has to meet. So the county can handle one end of it. So there's still a kind of a county portion handling it. But then the case management and certain portions of that are private agencies that are contracted with the Department of Milwaukee Child Protective Services.
And I think that varies throughout the country, how that works.
Yeah.
If the Child Protective Services, child welfare, whatever the term is used, that are they state or county folks, or are they, like I know Children's Hospital, I think, does a lot of the child welfare work in the state of Wisconsin.
Yeah, they're kind of the competitor for where I'm working, my agency. Okay. So yeah,
there we go.
But it's just the other agency that's doing it. So
well, Jim, we should definitely get back together. I'm sure you got more than one story here after that many years. Yeah. And obviously applied our methods over the years, and just hearing about, you had not told me that before, that when you first met Gary, I didn't know it was that long ago. And I didn't realize that you had done both POSC and verbal at the same time, and how you had, and the impact it had, in terms of restraints and all that. I mean, that's a big deal.
Seriously, meeting Gary back then, I mean, this is no exaggeration. I mean, it changed my life, shaped my life. And I'm sure that, all the training that I did, I still have people on Facebook and whatnot come up to me now, and, that training was the best I ever had. And, I mean, I think it's affected so many lives and affected so many people, and they don't even realize that it was, I guess, from Gary on down. So.
Yep. Big time. Okay, Jim. Well, thank you so much. I will, we'll do it again.
Definitely. Look forward to it.
Okay. Take care.
Too.
Well, that wraps up another episode of Confidence in Conflict. I always find it amazing how a tactic as simple as Vistelar's Showtime mindset can have such a huge impact. It was just great to hear Jim's story about that. Next week's episode will be an interview with Jared O'D, the founder of Dynamis, as I mentioned at the beginning. He's heads up our new division in the UK. I think you'll find this really interesting. Get a little global flavor to what we're talking about here. In the meantime, if you want more expert advice on how to prevent and better manage conflict, subscribe to this podcast at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like this episode, be sure and write us a review. Also, visit vistelar.com/blog to get notes for this show, share your comments, and access additional conflict management resources. Take care and stay safe.